Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told How to Voice Radio, and I promised you guys that every day until Halloween we would have one Halloween-themed video on this channel, and I would like to honour that promise, and today we're going to look at every Chandelure card ever printed and answer the question, is Chandelure actually any good? We haven't done one of these videos for a little while. I like Chandelure. He's my boy in Pokémon Tournament as much as I try and pretend he isn't. So we're going to be looking at all the Chandelure cards. And even though Chandelure came around in black and white, it took a little while until Noble Victories came out in November 2011 for us to get our first Chandelure card, and it was an absolute doozy. Really here, it was just played for the ability Cursed Shadow. Once during your turn, before you attack, if this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, you may put 3 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. And this was a really good deck around about Worlds 2012. It would be played with both Vileplume to block item cards and Excelgor, the one that would shuffle into your deck while paralysing and poisoning for a double colourless energy. And then, of course, what you would do is you would block items, attack with Excelgor, deck and cover, you would put Chandelure in the active, your opponent would be paralysed and not able to do anything, and then at the beginning of your next turn, Chandelure's in the active, you place 3 damage counters, retreat Chandelure, and you repeat until fade. This was a really good Pokemon that was part of a really good deck that was great at Worlds in 2012. Though it didn't win the World Championships, it was a very good deck, and I'm not embarrassed to say that I lost to this deck twice at Worlds in 2012, including a wonderful game against Pablo Meza, where he actually took all 6 prizes in a single turn, which was, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, absolutely wonderful. The attack Eerie Glow was basically garbage, nobody ever used it. Now, this was actually reprinted in Next Destinies in February 2012 as a beautiful secret rare Chandelure, one of my favourite cards of the black and white era. So yeah, really good Chandelure, lots of fun, part of a very good deck indeed. The next Chandelure came around, actually in Next Destinies, though it was a new Chandelure and our first Fire-type Chandelure. And like so many of these, it looked really good, but it wasn't quite enough to justify being a Stage 2 Pokemon. Being a Stage 2 Pokemon has always been the undoing of Chandelure. For 1 Fire Energy, 30 damage, and it does 30 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench, 30 to the active, 30 to each of 2 bench Pokemon. It's a good attack, but it doesn't quite do enough damage for a Stage 2 Pokemon. If this attack were on a basic Pokemon, it would be amazing, but it wasn't, so it wasn't. As for the second attack, 80 damage for 2 energy, discard all energy and you get a burn there as well. 80 for 2 is alright. Burn is a nice touch, but you've got to discard the energy while you go. It was always just a little bit too awkward. Good card, lots of potential, but honestly, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, it was just a Stage 2 and it wasn't quite good enough. The next Chandelure came around in Plasma Freeze, and that particular set was released in May 2013, and this was one of the Team Plasma Pokemon, meaning that it got all of the fun of using stuff like Deoxys to add a bit of extra damage, and you could, if you wish, use stuff like Colress Machine to accelerate energy from the deck. But it was the ability we really liked here. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a Fire Energy card and attach it to one of your Pokemon. If you do, put 1 damage counter on that Pokemon. Now, this was really good for something like Reshiram, for instance, where you could search your deck for the energy, then attach it to Reshiram, and it takes a damage counter, which of course was really good because of its Outrage attack. It was kind of like Typhlosion, except it attached from the deck rather than the discard, meaning that it was actually more reliable as a source of energy acceleration. And if this card was around in the Heart Gold Soul Silver era, when Reshiram Typhlosion was one of the best decks in the format, this would have been a much better option for Reshiram decks than Typhlosion. Unfortunately, it came around a bit too late and it never had a natural partner. One of those cards that really seemed to have a lot of potential. But then you ask the question, with what Pokemon am I playing it? And the answer is shrugging of the shoulders. The good news is, our next Chandelure, we did not have to wait very long at all. Chandelure EX came around in Legendary Treasures just 2 sets and 6 months later in November 2013. And this was really fun because Legendary Treasures was mainly a reprint set. But it did give us 2 new EX Pokemon that were Chandelure and Excadrill, both of which were among my favourite Pokemon from the Black and White games, so this made me pretty gosh darned happy indeed. And I'm not afraid to admit that I really tried to make this Chandelure work. Oh my goodness, time and effort was put into it. Unfortunately, it was not to be. For 1 Psychic Energy, put 4 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. And for 2 Psychic and a Colourless, 70 damage, plus Burn and Confusion. Sounded like a lot of fun, especially when Dimension Valley came out to drop it down to just 2 Psychic Energy. What was the biggest problem? This was around when Darkrai and Yveltal were wrecking the format. This was at the time when the very worst weakness you could have was Darkness type weakness. And that is exactly what Chandelure had. Remember that in the Pokemon trading card game, Ghost Pokemon come through as Psychic with a weakness to Dark, whereas Psychic and Poison come through with Psychic and a weakness to Psychic. Little bit of a shame, unfortunately, never saw a huge amount of play. You saw it popping up as a tech in decks occasionally, it didn't see zero play. And certainly I tried to make it work. But it never really got to the heights that I thought it should get to. The next Chandelure came around in Phantom Forces in November 2014, and it should have been great. It had the ability Fainting Spell. If this Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an attack, so not an ability and not something like Poison or Burn or Confusion, flip a coin. If heads, the attacking Pokemon is knocked out as well. And in a format full of EX Pokemon, where they take 1 prize knocking out Chandelure, then you flip a coin, hit a heads and take 2 prizes off an EX, this should have been great. And the last time we had this ability with Gengar, it was amazing. What was the difference between Gengar and Chandelure? The attacks. At the end of the day, as much as Fainting Spell is one of the most ridiculous, broken and downright unfair abilities we've ever had in the Pokemon trading card game, a Psychic and a double Colourless to put 6 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like, that was not good enough, ladies and gentlemen, in 2013. Especially when we remember that Gengar came around in November 2008, 5 years earlier, and for 1 energy, not 1 energy and a double Colourless, it could also drop 6 damage counters. Now, admittedly, it was only onto 1 Pokemon that had an ability, but even so, seriously? 5 years later, it's a worse attack? Yeah. That was not destined to be great. Brilliant ability didn't work. By 5 years later, I mean 6 years later, because Phantom Forces was 2014 and Stormfront was 2008. Our next Chandelure came around in Steam Siege in August 2016, and once again we see a really interesting ability. Something that we often see on Chandelures are really good abilities. Certain Pokemon have certain things in common throughout many of their cards. Chandelure's thing is interesting abilities. Once during your turn, you may look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put 1 of them into your hand, and discard the other one. The ability is Acrobike. And we know that Acrobike is really good. What's the problem? It's on a stage 2, and just the attack isn't particularly good. Now, I really like the attack. Psychic and a Colourless Energy, and for a while we had Dimension Valley, meaning you could do it for 1 Psychic Energy, and in the expanded format you still can. 10 damage plus 10 more for each supporter card in your discard pile. Maybe with Battle Compressor you could maybe make it work. but unfortunately it just adds up way too slowly. It never quite gets to the power you want it to. You kind of need 18 supporters in the discard to really start doing good, and that's just not happening. Looks great the first time you look at it, but it doesn't hold up the more you think. And the only Chandelure from the Sun and Moon block, the most recent one, came around in Guardians Rising in May 2017, just a few short months ago, and once again we have an interesting ability. Once during your turn, you may move one damage counter from one Pokemon to another Pokemon, either moving damage from yours to your opponents or from one of your opponents to another one of theirs, etc. Seems good, but once again, people just aren't playing it as a stage 2 just for the ability. 1 fire energy, 50 damage plus a burn, which with the new burn rules means that you're doing minimum 70. Then they flip a coin. If heads, they're not burned. If tails, they're still burned. And then they take another 20 after their turn, and so on and so forth. Seems really good, but again, if that was on a basic, it would be great. But it's on a stage 2. And it's just too expensive. So what do we see from Chandelure? A very consistent Pokemon. Really good abilities, generally on stage 2s that we just cannot afford to get into play, and attacks that are generally too expensive or too underpowered to warrant playing on a stage 2. But if we add up all of the cards that Chandelure has had, one of the most interesting Pokemon in the history of the Pokemon trading card game, I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that. And he's my boy in Pokken Tournament, and we're basically talking about a spooky Chandelure right on Halloween. How could I not, ladies and gentlemen? How could I not give you this video? But as always, I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comment section. What do you think about Chandelure? What was your favourite Chandelure card? Did you play any of these and think they're better than I made them out? I would love to hear. Let me know in the comments. Go nuts! Be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. That's where live action happens. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, etc. A new one went up this past weekend. Then you can do so at patreon.com/PTCGRadio. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.